In place of a reading this morning, I've actually brought a guided reflection or meditation to you. And I found it or came up with the idea with inspiration from what for me was an unlikely setting. Those of you who know me know that I work Monday through Friday in a corporate setting. Got one of those corporate jobs with lots of acronyms and spreadsheets and meetings that should have been emails and all that comes with it. But every once in a while, I pick up something there, an idea that I can feel start to germinate into something else that maybe I could use in my spiritual life. And that's what I'm doing today. There's a practice used in a lot of companies or team settings, particularly in tech companies. There's something called a stop, start, and continue exercise. Who knows? Anyone ever done one of these? Okay, familiar. Yeah, so this will happen, let's say you're at the beginning of a new year, or you've just got a new project in front of you, there's some new work that the group has to do, and you're realizing that you probably don't have the bandwidth to do all the things that are in front of you, so you get together and you have this fun brainstorming exercise that's called a stop, start, continue, where you take all the work that you're doing and you dump it onto a whiteboard or onto Post-it notes or something, and then you, as a group, look at all of these items and decide which of these things that we're doing today should we stop doing. We don't need to do them. Maybe we're doing it because we've always done it, or we did it for a reason that doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of amazing how many of those things you might find. Which things do we need to start? What's the stuff on the table that we're not doing yet that we feel like is really important and we should pick up? And then, of course, what are the things we should continue? What's the work that's currently on our plate that we want to take with us and move forward into? So stop, start, continue. Pretty simple. So today, though, I want to borrow it to try to do something a little bit deeper, because this topic that I'm bringing to you today, this work of undoing, is about undoing habits, assumptions, or ways of being that can keep us stuck. And that doesn't just happen on its own. It asks us to pause first. We have to notice. We have to begin with intention. So, if you are so inclined, I invite you now to take a deep breath with me and settle in for this short meditation. As you start to feel yourself slow a little bit, of course, if you're comfortable doing so, you may choose to close your eyes or soften your gaze. Let your body feel supported by the seat underneath you, by your feet on the floor. And as I ask these questions, I can imagine for some of us there will be a few topics that bubble up to the surface pretty quickly. Let's try to focus on one thing per question. First, ask yourself gently, what is one thing I might stop? Something that no longer serves me. Something I need to let go of to make room for something new, for healing. And as you imagine that one thing that you might stop doing, that you might put down, that means there's room that's created in your heart, with your time. What's one thing now you might start? A new practice of love, a way of being that brings more kindness, more courage, more truth. And what is one thing that you know you want to continue? Something you feel gratitude towards because it's already good and whole in your life. Proof that you already know how to do the work, that your heart is already working and open and full of love. A practice, a relationship, a way of being that helps you stay grounded and connected. The work of undoing is never finished in a single moment, but in each moment we can begin again. And when you're ready, you can gently return to the room. Thanks for doing that with me. So I come to you this morning knowing, as we all know, truly, that so much in this world needs fixing, and it remains overwhelming. This is something that none of us can ignore and that many of us cannot seem to stop thinking about for even 5 minutes. But this morning, I am here sitting with the understanding that there are some things you can't just work harder to fix. Some things don't get better by doubling down on the same approach. Some things actually have to be undone. In nature, death and decay are essential for new life. Nothing blooms forever. Compost feeds the soil. Leaves fall from trees in autumn, making way for spring. If we want to create the conditions for life to flourish, we sometimes first have to let things fall apart or take them apart. And that's hard work, especially for those of us raised to keep everything held together, who learn to find our productivity through our performance. Especially when you've been taught your whole life that you just gotta keep going, no matter what, right? Undoing can look like so many things, and I'm gonna touch on a few of the layers of this here. It can be a personal undoing, letting go of a story about yourself that no longer fits. It can be relational, unlearning the habits of control or withdrawal or people-pleasing that keep us from showing up authentically with one another. And it can be collective, dismantling systems that divide and harm. As Universalists, we come from a tradition that rejected the idea of eternal damnation. Our Universalist ancestors knew something about undoing. Hosea Ballou, one of our early leaders who was born right at the dawn of this country in 1771, stood up against a theology that said only a few could be saved. And he said, no, love is bigger than that. It wasn't easy. Originally a Baptist, Ballou first began to preach his understanding of God and was ridiculed, dismissed, even cast out by some of the religious leaders of his time. Ballou believed that it was our God-given right to be happy. He said, if the Almighty, as we believe him to be, did not possess power sufficient enough to make all creatures happy, it was not an act of goodness in him to create them. If it be granted that God has both power and will to save all men, it is granting all I want for a foundation in my faith. Even as he was ridiculed, even as he was excommunicated from his father's church, Ballou kept preaching that hell wasn't God's punishment. Hell was what we made for each other on this earth. He believed that the work of salvation, the work of love, was to undo that harm, to undo that hell, to build a world where no one was cast aside, where no one was beyond grace. Our Universalist ancestors believed in a love so wide, so liberating, that no one was beyond its reach. And they weren't afraid to do the work to undo the theologies and the systems and the ideas that had held them back from that belief. But they also knew, as I've said, that hell is real, although not in the afterlife, in their belief, but here, now. It's in systems of oppression. It exists in stories of shame, in the parts of our lives and our world that are no longer rooted in love. The sacred art of undoing, as I'm thinking about it today, is the work of climbing out of those hells, of dismantling what harms, of releasing what no longer serves, and of clearing space for something more whole, more just, and more true. I believe there is something sacred about stopping, about recognizing when something we've built, an idea, a habit, a relationship, a system, no longer serves life, love, or liberation. So, where do we start? Well, the easiest entry point to such an exploration is the place where we hold the most intimate knowledge. Some of the deepest undoing isn't out there in the world, it's inside of each of us. Each of us likely holds beliefs, habits, or ways of doing certain things that don't truly serve us or our place in this world. Maybe you were told directly or indirectly that your worth was conditional, that love had to be earned, that strength meant silence, or that identity or difference was something to hide. We all learn early how to contort ourselves into versions of ourselves that are easier to tolerate, quieter, straighter, smaller, shinier. But the sacred work of undoing asks us to unlearn that shame, to stop carrying stories that were never truly ours, to listen for the deeper truth, the one that says you are whole, beloved, and worthy as you are, even if someone somewhere told you otherwise. As an example, for much of my life, I believed my queerness was a problem to solve, a stumbling block, something I would have to work around or keep quiet in spiritual spaces. The message I internalized when I was young was clear: queerness and holiness could not coexist. And so I split myself. I tucked parts of me away, convinced that full belonging was only for those who could conform. I did a lot of bending and shrinking to try to fit what I thought was expected, especially in church. But it turns out you can only hold your breath for so long. And over time, I came to understand something else. I came to see that my queerness is not a barrier to my faith. It is a portal to it. In working to undo the beliefs that my queerness separated me from God or the divine, I began to understand all that it gave me, that allowed me to more fully connect with my spirituality. It was queerness that taught me to question binaries. It was queerness that taught me what it means to choose family, to live in truth, to build community outside the margins. It was queerness that taught me how to hold grief and beauty together. To undo the belief that these parts of me were in conflict was one of the most sacred undoings of my life. And once I knew that I could change that story, something that had felt so deep and so permanent, I realized that stories could change everywhere. Moving on from ourselves alone, some of the hardest undoing we'll ever do is in our closest relationships. It's one thing to talk about dismantling unjust systems out there in the world. It's another to look someone you love in the eye and say, I was wrong, or maybe I've been doing this wrong. Undoing in relationship might mean learning to apologize, not just to smooth things over, but to take responsibility for harm that you've caused. It might mean setting a boundary where there wasn't one before, even when that boundary disappoints someone we care about. Creating a boundary is a powerful way to undo relational patterns that have harmed us or others in the past. They create the possibility for relationships to transform into something new, healing, and hopeful. Another way of undoing in relationship might mean breaking a pattern of silence, naming what's been unsaid for too long. Or it could mean learning to stay present when our instinct is to withdraw or shut down. Undoing in relationship is not about being perfect. It's about choosing again and again to show up with care, to keep learning, to keep loving. And when we do this in our own lives and in our own closest relationships, it can start to ripple outward. Because the ways we show up with our families, our partners, our friends, our closest communities, those are building blocks of the world we're trying to create. This is the ripple effect of undoing. The sacred work of undoing doesn't stop with us. It stretches outward to our institutions, our economies, our culture. Writer, activist, and somatic healer Prentice Hemphill talks about transformational characters, people who choose to live differently within the story of their time, people who recognize patterns of harm and choose to interrupt them, even in small ways, through their choices, in how they love, they lead, how they resist and repair, they shift what's possible. Each of us has a chance to be a transformational character in the story we're living now. And what could that look like? How could seemingly small personal changes actually work to undo the larger systems of oppression that we recognize all around us? Well, for example, undoing white supremacy might look like giving up control in a space you're used to leading, and instead centering voices and wisdom that have been historically silenced. Undoing transphobia and homophobia might look like ensuring our welcome is more than symbolic, creating policies and cultures that protect and affirm all identities, especially those most at risk. Undoing ableism might mean reimagining how we gather, so we're not just accommodating, but building belonging from the ground up. Undoing capitalism's grip on our worth might mean resisting the myth of hustle and burnout. It might mean asking, what would our communities look like if we prioritized healing over efficiency? These are not small shifts. They do require courage, imagination, and collective commitment. But they can also start with you. And maybe, probably, you're already doing some of this sacred undoing. Maybe you're raising children who know they are beloved exactly as they are. Maybe you're speaking up in rooms where silence used to feel safer. Maybe you're deconstructing old theology or building a workplace that values equity. Maybe you're learning to rest or to ask better questions or to say, I don't know, but I am listening. Earlier, we spent some time reflecting on what we might stop, start, and continue in our own lives. This is the heart of this sacred work of undoing, making space for love by letting go of what no longer serves, beginning what brings life, and carrying forward what is already good. And, like our friend Vashti, sometimes undoing begins when we realize that the story we're stuck in maybe never really was true in the first place. So I'll ask you again, what might love be calling you to stop? What is waiting to begin? And what good, liberating, faithful work is already yours to carry forward? Together, we clear the way for love to grow. Undoing is not the end of the story, it's the clearing, the space between, the moment before something new can take root. If we are to be a people of love, then we must also be a people of courage, people who are willing to stop, to unlearn, to begin again. The work is before us. Let's do it together. Amen, and blessed be.